This is the Fujifilm 16-50mm f2.8 to f4.8, and it's Fuji's latest mid-range zoom lens, which has been designed basically as a replacement to the 18-55 kit lens. So the mid-range that I've been using is the 16-80mm, which I like a lot, and if you've seen my review, you'll know that it's not the sharpest lens, but it is decent, and its flexibility make it incredibly useful. But since the 40 megapixel sensor was launched, it's been a little odd that that lens, which isn't classified as being optimized for the 40 megapixel sensor, is being sold with the camera, something like the X-T5 or the X-T-XH2 as a kit. So this is basically Fuji's response to that. It's technically an update to the old 18-55 kit lens, but in many ways it will replace the 16-80 due to the fact that it's optimized for cameras like the X-T5, the X-T50, the XH2, and is being sold as a kit lens with those. So I've been using this lens for the last couple of weeks here in the Dolomites and putting it through its paces for some mountain and landscape photography. Now this is a kit lens, so you're not going to get the kind of build quality that you get with one of Fuji's red badge lenses, something like the 16-55 f2.8. But having said that, it is pretty well built. It's easily comparable to the 16-80mm or the 18-55 with an all-metal build and weather sealing. Now what really impresses me, the zoom is completely internal, so it doesn't extend when you zoom out, which is a bit of a surprise on an inexpensive lens like this, and it's something that I really liked a lot. It also means that you get there's a lot less chance of dirt or sand or grit getting stuck inside the lens, which is an occupational hazard when you're shooting landscapes. Now the rings mostly have a nice feel with a good level of resistance in the zoom ring and a satisfying click on the aperture ring. The focus ring, however, is a little bit loose, which is something that I do tend to complain about on pretty much every Fuji XF lens. It makes manual focus just a little bit jumpy and a little bit harder to be precise, and I do wish that Fuji would make the resistance on the rings more similar to the stiffness that you get on GFX lenses, but I do accept that that is something that's very personal. Overall though, I've been really impressed with the feel of the lens, and the weather sealing does seem to have stood up to the worst the Dolomites weather could throw at it without any issues at all. But what's really impressed me the most about the lens is its size and its weight. It is absolutely tiny and very light. At 250 grams, it's lighter than the 18-55 it replaces, and almost half the weight of the 16-80 and about 40% of the weight of the 16-55 f2.8. Now that really makes it an attractive option for a lot of reasons. Here in the Dolomites, we've been trekking about 15 kilometers a day with your backpack on your back for about 8 hours, and so having a lightweight kit is really appealing. But alternatively, as a carry-around lens for vacations or for street photography, the fact that this weighs next to nothing and takes up very little space make it really, really useful. Using this with the Sigma 10-18 as my wide angle and the 55-200 as my telephoto, those three lenses weigh in at less than 1 kilogram combined and give me a reach from 10mm all the way up to 200mm with an f2.8 aperture at the wide end. So yeah, the build of this, the size, the weight do make this a very attractive lens for landscapers. Now this focal length, the 16-50, it is useful I think for most people for a lot of general shooting, but for landscapes it's not super wide, so I did often find myself needing something a little bit wider, and also I often find myself needing something longer, the telephoto lens. So I think for a lot of people this might work as a do-it-all walk-around lens, but for my style of shooting in landscapes, it's actually less useful than something like the 16-80 due to the extra reach of that lens, and the fact that if you're using something like the 70-300 or the 100-400, then it's going to leave a gap in an important area. But having said that, 16-50 is a pretty standard mid-range focal range, and so if you're used to using that, if it's a focal range that you like a lot, then yeah, this is going to be a very useful lens. Now there is no control on the outside of the lens for stabilization because this doesn't have optical image stabilization, although I'm not sure quite how much that matters, as all of Fuji's current generation cameras do have in-body stabilization in the camera, but that probably is going to matter to you if you want to pair this with an older body, something like the X-T30 or X-T3 or the X Pro 3. Now at around 800 euros or $700 on its own, it's not really a cheap lens, and it comes in at a very similar price as the 16-80, but if you buy it as part of a kit with a body like the XT5 or XT50 or XS20, you essentially get it at around half the price. And for what you get, I do really think that that's a great deal. Kit lenses generally have a bad reputation, but the 18-55 is relatively well regarded. And I think that this is very much the same. It's incredibly portable. It's well made and flexible. But putting all that aside, what about the image quality? Now, if you've seen any of my reviews before, you'll know that I am a landscape photographer and I spend roughly about 4 months of the year in the field shooting. And as such, when I look at a lens, I look at it as a tool to do a job. And for me, things like absolute sharpness and resolution are just elements that need to be balanced against things like the usability of the lens in terms of its flexibility and its weight. As I do a lot of hiking, carrying my gear on my back for hours at a time, as I've done on this trip. So consequently, when I look at the image quality of a lens, I don't really care about resolution charts and corner-to-corner sharpness at every aperture. What I want to know is how well it gets the job done at the apertures I tend to shoot landscapes at, and how it compares with other options that I could use, like the 16-80mm on the XT5's 40 megapixel sensor. So that being said, let's have a look at some of the images I've shot in the field over the 2 weeks here in the mountains and a few comparison frames. Alright, so let's have a look at some images that I shot with the lens in the Dolomites, just to give you an idea of the kind of performance that you can get with the lens when you're shooting landscapes in the field. But bear in mind that what you're going to be seeing is going to have been compressed for YouTube upload. So you're not going to get really a full idea of quite how much detail this lens produces. So the first thing is that I really did feel that this produced a lot of fine detail in these kind of images that have got a lot of fine detail. Like here you can see in the rock fall along here. It just feels as though that it really is resolving a lot of detail here. And I think that's probably because since I've had the XT5, I've mainly been using lenses with it. Lenses like the 10-24, the 55-200, the 70-300, and the 16-80, which are all lenses that basically don't give the full resolution of the sensor. So using this lens, which is specifically designed to resolve all of the detail that the sensor is capable of, I really did feel that I noticed it a lot in quite a few of these images. So you can see the fine detail here all the way along the road, in these trees, down here in the car park. It does get a little bit soft. Some of the details are a little bit smeary here around this tree in the corner, but overall, zoomed into 100%, that really is producing quite a lot of detail here. You can see this refugio up on the mountain ridge there. So that's shot at 16mm at f5.6, which is generally where you would expect the lens to perform well. It's closed down a couple of stops from its widest aperture. This is shot at about 21mm at f7.1. I tend to shoot a lot of landscapes around about that aperture. It gives you a very good depth of field, but you're also kind of in that zone where the lens is still very, very sharp. And just the level of detail here in the trees all the way up onto this mountain, which is a long way away and seen through a little bit of haze here. So that's, I think, why we're not getting loads and loads of detail in this mountain. It is so distant. But if we look at the other end of the lake here, you can see this small wooden thing here. This is a sauna. And just all of the fine detail along the trail here, up on the side of the banks, in this foliage, all of these trees here in this island in the lake. And just down here, let's have another look. I think this one is at a similar focal length. Yes, this is at 19mm, so you can see this is shot in very bright sunny conditions. But the level of detail here in Tofana, so this is shot in the middle of the day. There's a lot less haze around, so even though this mountain is a long way away, just the detail that it's pulling up is really quite impressive for a kit lens. That's actually me standing there on this ridge, but if you look at all the detail here, that's really quite nice. Let's just check the corners. That corner seems to be okay. There doesn't seem to be any smearing there. Maybe a little bit here in this corner. But generally, all the way across the frame, it really does seem to be rendering a lot of nice detail here when you look at this. This one is shot at 30mm. This one's a little bit more haze, a little bit more cloud in the air, you can see here, but again, still the detail in these peaks, which are quite a long way away, a few kilometers away, and the detail in the far bank of the lake, which is much closer here, in the rock on this island. Yep, that's at f5. So and this is at ISO 640. I think this is because this was a handheld shot, and I wanted to try to make sure that there was no camera shake in there. So there's a fast shutter speed, so ISO 640 f5, but it gives you a better idea of what you can do. The previous images were shot on a tripod, and I think this last one here is also shot on a tripod. This is again 7.1 at 50mm, so this is the longest focal range. And just the fine detail that this is pulling out here, I just don't really see this level of detail with the 16-80, and I do love the 16-80. It's a lovely lens. I recorded a video about that last year saying how much I enjoyed using the lens, its flexibility, and it does perform quite well. But I do feel that when it's compared with a newer lens like this that's capable of resolving all of the resolution of the 40 megapixel sensor, that you do start to see a little bit of a difference here. So this is what I'd like to do, is do some comparison shots between the two lenses. So let's just choose these two here and look at both of them. Now, after everything that I've said about the 16-50 producing more detail, when I did these comparison shots, I was actually surprised that the difference wasn't more apparent. We have the 16-80 here on the left and the 16-50 here on the right. And I do think that it's showing a little bit more detail, but there's not really loads. Let's have a look at an area of finer detail. I think around these tiles here, if we look here at the 1680, I think here the details are a little bit more smeared. They're not quite so sharp. And if we go down to this area around this fuse box here, again, I think you can start to see a difference in the sharpness there. I don't know, not the sharpness, in the resolution. But I don't know if that's going to come across after YouTube compression. And then if we go into, let's go into the bottom left corner. Yeah, I do feel that there's certainly more detail around this door frame in the 16-50 than there is in the 16-80. Let's try another focal length. So this is at about 22 millimeters. All right, same settings on both lenses, obviously, same shutter speed, same aperture, same ISO. This time we have the 16-50 again, still on the right. I feel that the difference in resolution is a little bit more apparent here. There seems to be a lot more detail in this cement around the door and in the ironwork around the balcony. Let's go to this fuse box. It's not huge here. If I look at the lettering on the box here, you can't really see that much difference. And I do think that the 16-80 is performing well. And I think the difference here, as opposed to the images that I looked at earlier, and everything here is relatively close. In the images that I was looking at earlier, we were looking at scenes that are a lot further away. I don't know if that might actually be absolute nonsense, not really sure. But while I can see a difference here between the two lenses, it's not as apparent as I thought it would be. So this is zoomed in to 50 millimeters. So this is right at the end of the zoom range. And I do believe that you can see a bit more difference here in the detail in the concrete. Again, I'm not quite sure how much of this is going to come across after the compression for YouTube upload. But just right there, not really that much when I look at these images. But when I looked at the images that I shot in the field, I really do feel that the 16-50 was pulling out a very good amount of detail. But I'm not quite sure if it's rendered, if it's as visible in these comparisons with a scene that is just a few meters away. Now, overall, then, I've been really happy with the lens. Now, I'm not usually much of a fan of mid-range zooms. Most of my work tends to be at the very wide end of the wide angle or the telephoto end. So if I am going to take a mid-range with me, it does help that it is very small and light, convenient to carry. And this certainly fits that bill. It's a pocket-sized lens that you don't really notice that you're carrying. But with the weather sealing and the internal zoom, it really does feel like much more than a kit lens, which I suppose is very much reflected in the price because it's not cheap. I've been carrying it along with the 10-18 Sigma, which weighs 260 grams, so that's combined just 500 grams for the two lenses. And I found that to be excellent for hiking, and the image quality of the 16-50 is actually better than the 16-80 on the 40 megapixel sensor, the X-T5 that I use. But you do lose the flexibility and the fantastic focal range of that lens, which, as I've said in other videos, does pair really well with the 70-300. But personally, I think that this is worth the trade, and besides, you can easily pair it with the 55-200 or the 50-140. So for me, I tend to use the X-T5 when I want to go and travel really light, and for this is an absolutely great lens. It is not inexpensive, but if you pick it up with the kit, I think that it offers really great value and is definitely worth it. And I think that's it for this review. If you've got any questions at all, please drop them below or send me an email and I will get back to you. And if you've enjoyed the video, please subscribe. I really do appreciate the support of the channel. And if you enjoy my photography, if you enjoy the way I shoot, I'd really like to have you join me on a workshop. I run workshops all over the world. Next year, we've got workshops lined up for Iceland, for Japan, for Namibia, for Utah, Madeira and the Azores. And beyond that, we're already opening workshops in 2026 in places like Botswana and also returning to Japan. So you can find full information on all of these workshops on my website. And if you've got any questions at all, just drop me an email and I'll get back to you. And as ever, thanks so much for watching and good luck with all your photography. I'll see you next time. Take care.